Let us be entirely honest about what the typical evening realistically looks like for the vast majority of working adults today, particularly those navigating the relentless demands of the modern knowledge economy. You finally clock out of your job at 5 o'clock or perhaps 5:30 in the evening. By the time you successfully navigate the crowded, unpredictable commute, endure the inevitable delays on public transport, or sit gridlocked in traffic, perhaps stop to pick up a few essential groceries from the local shop, and finally turn the key in your front door, the clock has easily crept past 6:30. You are not just physically tired. You are profoundly, existentially drained on a psychological level. Your cognitive load has been entirely maxed out by a relentless, uninterrupted barrage of emails, endless strategy meetings, complex micro-decisions, and the urgent necessity of putting out sudden, unforeseen administrative fires at work. The modern economy does not necessarily require you to lift heavy physical objects or perform manual labor, but it absolutely demands a constant, unbroken state of hypervigilance and complex mental processing that leaves the brain severely depleted, heavily fatigued, and desperately craving a reprieve by the late afternoon. Modern society constantly and aggressively reinforces a very specific, highly commercialized narrative about what should inevitably happen next. The prevailing cultural script, echoed by advertisements, peers, and media, tells us that the evening is exclusively reserved for unwinding and doing absolutely nothing of substance. We have deeply, perhaps dangerously, normalized the idea that because we dutifully sold our time, our intellectual energy, and our focus to an employer from 9 to 5, we have definitively earned the absolute right to shut our brains off entirely from 5 to 9. We treat this daily exhaustion as a badge of honor, a universal shared experience, and we routinely use it as an ironclad justification for intellectual paralysis and stagnation. As a direct result of this mindset, we willingly and routinely fall into the pervasive, deeply comforting trap of passive consumption. We collapse onto the sofa and scroll endlessly through short-form videos that systematically fracture our attention span and rewire our dopamine receptors. We binge-watch television programmed for hours on end, entirely losing track of time, or we consume sensationalized, fear-driven news headlines that do absolutely nothing for our personal growth or intellect, but instead dramatically spike our anxiety levels and leave us feeling even more hollow, powerless, and exhausted than when we first walked through the door. But here is the hard, incredibly uncomfortable truth that unequivocally separates the extraordinarily successful from the painfully, perpetually average. There is a massive, fundamental, and life-altering difference between true resting and merely numbing yourself. Numbing is an escape mechanism. It is a psychological strategy for temporarily turning off the acute discomfort of a mediocre, unfulfilling day through the pursuit of cheap, easily accessible dopamine hits. True resting, however, is intentional, deliberate recovery. It actively replenishes your cognitive reserves, soothes your nervous system, and prepares you for the challenges ahead. And while you are actively numbing yourself in front of a glowing screen, lost in a digital void, your most incredibly valuable, entirely irreplaceable asset, your finite time on this earth, is silently, irreversibly slipping away into the ether, never to be recovered or refunded. If we genuinely want to understand how to fundamentally break this destructive cycle and reclaim our potential, we must carefully observe how the world's most effective, enduringly successful thinkers operate. There is perhaps no better, more universally respected example of this than Warren Buffett. If you were to somehow gain access to Buffett's daily calendar, you would likely be profoundly shocked by what you find. For a man who single-handedly built and manages one of the most powerful, complex, and highly capitalized holding companies in the history of the global financial system, his schedule is famously, intentionally, and rigorously empty. There are entire days, sometimes weeks, on his calendar with absolutely nothing officially scheduled at all. There are no frantic, back-to-back board meetings, no constant press briefings, no reactive Zoom calls, and no running frantically around corporate headquarters putting out minor administrative fires. He purposefully isolates himself in Omaha, physically and psychologically distancing himself from the chaotic, reactive noise of Wall Street. Why does he deliberately operate this way? Because Buffett fundamentally and unshakably understands that his true job is not to appear busy. His actual primary job is to think clearly, deeply, and without interruption. He fiercely, almost ruthlessly, protects his unstructured time because he knows beyond a shadow of a doubt that profound clarity of thought, strategic foresight, and the ability to recognize long-term patterns cannot possibly exist in a crowded, noisy, constantly interrupted mind. Now, you might immediately and cynically think that this is incredibly easy for a multi-billionaire to do, while you have a demanding mid-level management job, an uncompromising boss breathing down your neck, strict deadlines to meet, and mounting inescapable bills to pay. And you are entirely, undeniably right in that specific assessment. You cannot simply abandon your 9-to-5 responsibilities. That job is your current vital economic engine. It pays the mortgage, it buys the groceries, it funds your transport, and it keeps the lights on. It is an absolute necessity for survival in the modern world. However, your 5 to 9 is an entirely different domain with entirely different rules. That 4-hour window is your personal, sovereign laboratory. The hours after you finish work are not merely a passive waiting room where you sit around, killing time and distracting yourself until the next workday inevitably begins. They are the only hours in the entire day that you truly, completely, and unquestionably own without caveat. And they are the precise, critical hours where you actually build your life's actual work, your legacy, and your future leverage. If you treat your evenings as nothing more than a passive, numbing recovery period designed solely to help you endure tomorrow's shift, you will tragically and inevitably remain stuck in the exact same socioeconomic, professional, and intellectual loop year after year, decade after decade, until retirement. You will have sold your potential for the illusion of comfort. This stark realization brings us directly to the core philosophy of exactly how Buffett historically utilizes his fiercely protected quiet time, a philosophy that you must actively adapt to your own evenings if you wish to see a different trajectory. When asked repeatedly by journalists, students, and shareholders over the decades about the singular key to his monumental, unprecedented success, Buffett famously pointed to a massive, intimidating stack of trade manuals, dense investment papers, and formidable books, stating flatly that one should read 500 pages like that every single day. He elaborated by explaining that this is exactly how knowledge actually works. It builds up, layer upon imperceptible layer, much like the mathematical miracle of compound interest. However, taking that specific piece of advice entirely literally is a guaranteed, foolproof recipe for immediate burnout and failure for the average working professional. If you attempt to forcefully sit down and read 500 pages of dense material tonight after a grueling, soul-draining day at the office, your brain will violently reject it, your focus will shatter, and you will quit the endeavor entirely by tomorrow morning. The absolute magic word in his famous, widely quoted statement is not the intimidating number 500. The magic, transformative word is compound. In the rigid mathematical realm of finance, compound interest occurs when the initial interest you earn on your principal investment begins to actively earn interest on itself in subsequent periods. In the very beginning, the growth is incredibly slow, frustratingly linear, and almost invisible to the naked eye. But over the sustained span of a decade or two, it creates a parabolic curve of exponential, staggering growth that entirely defies basic human intuition. Warren Buffett, alongside his brilliant partner Charlie Munger, has brilliantly and systematically applied this exact, immutable mathematical law to human intelligence, structural understanding, and skill acquisition. They do not just compound money, they aggressively compound their mental models. Consider deeply and specifically what Buffett is actually doing during his countless hours of quiet, unbroken focus. He is not merely routing entertaining, transient opinion columns, skimming the daily headlines, or getting caught up in the fleeting, emotional outrage of the daily social media discourse. He is engaging in deep, rigorous, uncompromising corporate financial analysis. He sits alone in his quiet office, meticulously and patiently reading through dry, incredibly dense annual reports that most investors completely ignore. He is carefully looking at complex income statements, aggressively interpreting highly nuanced financial reporting metrics, and striving to profoundly, structurally understand the raw, underlying mechanics of exactly how a specific business generates long-term, sustainable value. He is not looking for stock tips. He is searching for fundamental, unchanging truths about human behavior, macroeconomics, capital allocation, and market dynamics that absolutely do not fluctuate from week to week based on the sensationalized news cycle. When you make the deliberate choice to spend your evening learning a hard fact, struggling through the friction to understand a complex new concept, or slowly, painstakingly mastering a difficult technical skill, that newly acquired knowledge does not just sit in your brain in isolated, disconnected storage. It immediately begins to interact, synthesize, and connect with absolutely everything else you already know. When you take the time to learn a new, foundational principle of behavioral economics, it permanently changes how you interpret a historical event you read about last month. When you master a new technical system or logical framework, it suddenly and starkly reveals a massive inefficiency in how you currently perform your daily job, offering you an opportunity to innovate and stand out. If you commit to spending just one single hour an evening engaged in this kind of rigorous, active, deliberate learning, you are laying individual bricks. For the first few days, weeks, or even months, it just looks like a scattered, unimpressive pile of bricks on the ground. Nobody will notice your effort. You will receive no external validation, and you might not even feel much smarter or more capable yourself. But after a year of consistent, unbroken evening routines, you have built a solid, undeniable wall. After 5 years of this disciplined, quiet dedication, you have constructed an entire intellectual house, an absolute fortress of competence. The person who systematically spends their evening engaged in active, deliberate learning begins to see complex, interconnected patterns in the world, in business, and in human behavior that the passively consuming person completely, hopelessly, and dangerously misses. To actually make this profound transition, to evolve from an exhausted, passive worker merely surviving the week into someone who commands the 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. window with lethal efficiency and strategic intent, requires a highly deliberate, almost architectural restructuring of your daily routine. You cannot simply will it into existence through fleeting motivation. You must build rigid, fail-safe systems to support it when your motivation inevitably vanishes. The first essential, non-negotiable phase of this evening system is deliberate, structured decompression. You cannot logically or biologically expect to transition straight from a high-stress, cortisol-soaked commute on a crowded train directly into deep, focused, cognitively demanding learning. Your brain requires a psychological airlock, a transitionary period to lower your heart rate and shift brainwave states. You must use the very first hour you are at home to strictly, mercilessly, and unapologetically disconnect from the demands of the corporate world. This means immediately changing out of your work clothes to physically signal a shift in identity from employee to individual. It means cooking a proper, nourishing meal with your own hands, chopping vegetables, and engaging your physical senses, or perhaps going out for a brisk, uninterrupted 20-minute walk in the fresh air without any headphones, music, or podcasts playing. The absolute, unbreakable rule during this vital decompression phase is zero glowing screens and zero work-related communication. No checking email just one last time to see if the boss replied, no checking the news, and absolutely no replying to urgent Slack messages. This is the time for true grounding, biological rest, actively preparing your mind for the deep work that comes next, rather than numbing it into a digital stupor. Once you have adequately decompressed and your nervous system has settled, you enter the second, most critical phase, creating a highly protected, impenetrable 60-minute time bubble. This specific, dedicated hour is your compounding hour, undoubtedly the most valuable 60 minutes of your entire day. To execute this, you must turn your mobile phone completely off, not just placed on silent or vibrate, but entirely powered down, and physically place it inside a drawer in another room. The mere presence of a smartphone in your peripheral vision, even if it is turned off, has been scientifically proven to dramatically drain cognitive capacity and working memory, as your brain must actively expend energy deciding not to look at it. During this sacred, meticulously guarded compounding hour, you must engage in active, highly focused skill acquisition or deep, intellectually challenging reading. Vague, unquantifiable goals, like telling yourself I want to get smarter or I want to read more this year, will absolutely fail you because they completely lack specific direction and measurable metrics. Instead, you must get incredibly granular, precise, and targeted. You must deliberately dedicate this hour to mastering a concrete, difficult, technical skill that provides you with outsized leverage in the modern, rapidly shifting economy. For instance, rather than mindlessly scrolling through the timeline of a social media platform, you might spend your evenings mastering advanced, enterprise-level office productivity software. You could deliberately dedicate your time to learning exactly how to build highly complex, flawlessly automated data management systems, utilizing advanced, nested logical formulas like SUMIF and SUMIFs to effortlessly manipulate, analyze, and extract insights from massive, unwieldy personnel datasets. Alternatively, your compounding hour might be focused entirely on a creative yet technical discipline. You could dive incredibly deep into the precise, underlying mechanics of technical graphic design, meticulously studying the rigid geometric frameworks, the mathematical alignment principles, and the specific high-saturation color rules necessary to consistently create stunning, professional-grade, modern 2D flat vector infographics that immediately capture attention and convey complex data beautifully. You could also choose to spend this critical hour aggressively adapting to the immediate future by thoroughly studying the underlying mechanics and logic of artificial intelligence. Instead of merely playing with AI tools passively, you could actively master advanced prompt engineering techniques, deeply understanding complex methodologies such as chain-of-thought reasoning, reverse prompting, or meta-prompting, learning exactly how to logically structure, sequence, and refine algorithmic commands to extract maximum utility, accuracy, and depth from large language models. These specific examples are absolutely not trivial, entertaining pastimes or casual hobbies. They are highly specific, fiercely compoundable, highly marketable hard skills. A single hour a night spent struggling with and eventually mastering complex datasets, advanced design mechanics, or sophisticated AI logic structures will rapidly, permanently, and undeniably separate you from the vast, overwhelming majority of your professional peers who only possess the absolute bare minimum knowledge required to avoid being fired. If technical skills are not your immediate professional focus, this vital hour can instead be dedicated to deep, transformative, rigorous reading. But again, the reading must be active, challenging, and demand your full attention. Instead of skimming shallow, click-driven blog posts, reading derivative self-help summaries, or consuming easily digestible airport thrillers, you might choose to immerse yourself completely in profound, enduring, culturally rich literature. You might spend your evenings engaged with intense, beautifully crafted novels that deeply challenge your preconceived worldview, force you to grapple with complex, morally ambiguous character dynamics, and fundamentally expand your emotional, historical, and psychological empathy. The ultimate goal of this hour, regardless of the subject matter, is friction. If what you are reading, studying, or practicing during this compounding hour feels entirely effortless, smooth, and perfectly comfortable, you are absolutely not compounding your knowledge. You are simply coasting on what you already know. True growth requires encountering a concept you do not understand, wrestling with it in the quiet of your room, and emerging 60 minutes later with a new mental model permanently installed in your brain. The third crucial, foundational element of successfully restructuring your evening is the strict, uncompromising curation of your physical and digital environment. Warren Buffett is famously, unapologetically ruthless about exactly what he allows to enter his mental space and cross his desk. He actively, deliberately ignores the flashing daily stock tickers, the frantic, loud punditry on financial news networks, and the prevailing macroeconomic hysteria because he recognizes it as entirely useless, distracting noise that harms his ability to think long-term. You must rapidly adopt this exact same level of ruthlessness regarding your own environment. You have to actively design what behavioral economists formally refer to as choice architecture. If you truly, genuinely want to read a challenging book in the evening, you cannot leave the book on a shelf in the other room. You must actively, deliberately place that specific book directly on your pillow when you make your bed in the early morning, guaranteeing with absolute certainty that it is the very first physical object you must interact with when you finally enter your bedroom at night. If you want to study complex financial metrics, accounting principles, or historical case studies, you must have the specific corporate reports or textbooks already printed out, physically highlighted, and waiting patiently on your meticulously cleared desk before you even leave for work in the morning. You must systematically, ruthlessly remove every single microscopic point of friction that stands between you and your good habits, while simultaneously, aggressively increasing the friction required to execute your bad habits. This might practically mean literally unplugging your television from the wall socket and physically placing the remote control inside a locked drawer in a completely different room. Human willpower is a distinctly finite, highly depletable biological resource, heavily dependent on your blood glucose levels and daily fatigue. If you rely purely on brute force willpower to force yourself to study a difficult subject at 7:30 p.m. after a terrible day at work, you will inevitably, consistently lose to the path of least resistance. The sofa will always win. You must intelligently engineer an environment where making the right, difficult choice actually becomes the easiest, most default action available to you. Finally, to genuinely sustain this rigorous practice, not just for a motivated week, but over years and decades, you must deeply understand and embrace the principle of the 20% energy reserve. The single most common, universally accepted, and deeply culturally ingrained excuse people use to actively avoid doing any meaningful work in the evening is the simple, defeated phrase, "I just do not have the energy." But the stark uncomfortable reality of the situation is that you lack energy at 6 p.m. precisely because you are willingly, habitually giving 100% of your available cognitive battery, emotional bandwidth, and physical stamina to your employer between the hours of 9 and 5. You are pouring your entire self into someone else's business, leaving absolutely nothing on the table for your own development, your own mind, and your own future. You need to consciously, deliberately, and somewhat selfishly start holding back a distinct, protected portion of your mental energy throughout the workday. Your job absolutely deserves your earnest effort, your uncompromised professionalism, your integrity, and your basic competence, but it absolutely, categorically, does not deserve your soul, your complete exhaustion, or your entire life force. You must begin to view yourself not as a disposable worker, but as an elite athlete strategically pacing themselves for a grueling marathon, not a panicked sprinter burning out completely in the first 100 meters of the race. Protect yourself aggressively from toxic workplace drama. Actively avoid engaging in unnecessary, energy-draining arguments with colleagues, and politely but firmly decline to attend endless meetings that do not strictly require your active, immediate presence. Hoard your cognitive energy, protect your focus, and manage your emotional output during the day so that you guarantee you have a 20% reserve tank fully ready and available to deploy for your own benefit at 7 p.m. It is utterly vital to completely understand that building an effective, compounding evening routine is absolutely not about adopting a toxic, self-destructive, hustle culture mentality. It is not an invitation to grind yourself into physical and mental dust, working relentlessly until midnight on zero sleep, entirely sacrificing your health, your relationships, and your sanity on the altar of productivity. Warren Buffett himself is incredibly famous for protecting his sleep schedule just as fiercely, if not more so, than his dedicated reading time, ensuring he consistently gets a full 8 hours of rest to allow his brain to properly consolidate the massive amounts of information he absorbs during the day. The fundamental premise of the 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. rule is not about doing more work. It is simply about making a quiet, incredibly powerful trade. It is about actively choosing to swap just one single fleeting hour of mindless, passive, entirely forgettable consumption for one single focused hour of deliberate, intentional, compounding growth. If you embark on this path, there will absolutely, inevitably be days where you fail completely. There will be dark, miserable Wednesdays where the rain is pouring relentlessly outside. Your commute was a nightmare. Your boss was insufferably demanding. Your energy is entirely depleted. And the absolute only thing you can possibly manage to do is order greasy takeout, collapse onto the sofa, and stare blankly at a screen until you fall asleep. That is not a failure of character. That is simply being human. The defining magical factor of compounding knowledge does not require perfect, unbroken, robotic daily perfection. Compounding requires aggressive, stubborn consistency over a very long, multi-year time horizon. When you inevitably miss a day, you do not panic, and you do not quit. You simply adhere to the one unbreakable rule of compounding. You ensure that you never, ever miss 2 days in a row. You forgive yourself for the exhausted Wednesday, and you fiercely reclaim your time on Thursday. If you can successfully internalize this profound shift in perspective, if you can truly, deeply learn to view your evenings not as the tired graveyard of a stressful day, but as the quiet, incredibly fertile, protected soil of your future autonomy, absolutely everything about the trajectory of your life changes. Tomorrow morning, your life will look exactly, frustratingly the same. You will still have to board the exact same crowded train. You will still have to sit at the exact same mundane desk, and you will still have to answer to the exact same frustrating manager. But 3, 4, or 5 years from now, the silent, invisible, entirely mathematical law of compounding will have worked its absolute magic within your mind. The massive, undeniable gap in capability, technical understanding, broad historical context, and financial opportunity between you and the person who spent those thousands of precious evening hours numbing themselves will become entirely, permanently insurmountable. They will wonder how you got so lucky, completely failing to realize that your luck was meticulously, quietly constructed, 1 hour at a time, while they were watching television. Use your evenings wisely, deliberately, and fiercely. They are the only true, unencumbered capital you will ever actually possess.